Despair, a word used to define the feeling of hopelessness, perfectly describes the fifth entry of Scott's popular franchise, Five Nights at Freddy's. This fifth entry, upon release on October 7th of 2016, was met with a more or less positive response, and the Let's Players were mostly happy with this game. However, this year has sparked a massive debate about this game, which originated from a video made by Yeah about this game and how it was a really frustrating, mediocre mess. Ever since then, there have been many discussions and arguments over whether or not this game was good to begin with, or if we were wrong for 6 years. So, let's dive into the convoluted chaos that is Five Nights at Freddy's sister location. This entry brought a massive shift in the direction the franchise was headed. No more were the dingy rundown pizzerias, horror attractions, or creepy bedrooms after dark. Instead, it switched to a more futuristic setting, with devices such as electric shockers, power modules, and scoopers. However, the feel of a FNaF game was still very much kept in mind of the developer when creating this game. Although we are no longer in a pizzeria setting, to me, it makes this environment a lot scarier, as we don't know what could happen to us in a setting we aren't accustomed to or don't even know about yet. A lot of blues and purples are used in most of the sections in this game, which gives it its own unique identity. The underground rental service, shrouded in darkness, brings a sense of hopelessness, a sense of being trapped in a place hardly anyone in the outside world knows much about. A dangerous place filled with robotic monstrosities designed to specifically kill. No wonder this place gives people the creeps. Pretty much every part of this facility is kept in darkness, with the only source of light being a flashlight that you carry around. The increased movement in this game expands on an aspect that FNAF 4 was really good at: concealing information. Since you're given only one flashlight to even look around, everything else is in the dark. Therefore, you do not know what horrors may be lurking there, waiting to strike. And because WASD movement exists in certain sections of this game, it only goes to amplify this aspect of the game's atmosphere. The lighting overall is handled spectacularly well, and is great for invoking a feeling of fear. But now, let's talk about the audio. Leon Riskin's soundtrack for Sister Location is a masterpiece of sound in horror. Tracks such as Watch Your Six, or Venta Black are remembered and loved even to this day for a very good reason. Other ambient tracks such as the elevator sounds or the scary ambience tracks or even the breaker room power tracks masterfully amplify the effect of the visuals. And the best part is, you don't even notice this when actually playing the game. And there's a very important reason behind this. When you are watching or playing something, if the music fits the scenery amazingly, then you don't actually notice that it is a really good soundtrack, as it does an outstanding job in immersing you in that scene. All the eerie sounds present here makes for a wonderfully scary experience that is sure to make the player feel creeped out. It seems different than the other games, where you would either have a loud fan and some background creepy noises or haunting sounds of the dark. But Sister Location turns that formula on its head and gives us a much quieter ambience, which honestly increases the spooky nature of this game, as it subverts our expectations to an extent, as we expect to hear some spooky entity, and yet nothing happens. This expectation does a fantastic job of keeping the player on edge, not knowing when a jump scare may strike out of the pitch black darkness. Overall, the sound design is done really well, thanks to Leon Riskin's amazing contribution to this entry. We have quite a few characters here, ranging from Biddy Babs to Funtime Foxy to Ballora, etc. The Biddy Babs aren't very scary design wise, it's just that their voices and minimal appearance make them scarier than they actually are. The mini arenas are creepy doll-like robots that crawl around. They're actually pretty creepy, especially considering their role on Night 4, as well as the story Room for One More from the book series Fazbear Frights. I'm not going to cover Electroblabs and LOL bits since they're mostly irrelevant to the franchise. Now, let's talk about some of the more important characters, starting off with Hand Unit. Now, before I begin, I would just like to say that Andy Field did an amazing job as the voice actor for Hand Unit in Sister Location. I can't really imagine anyone else taking up that role anymore. However, whatever criticism I throw at the character isn't meant at him or his voice acting ability, but purely the implementation of it in the game. And this applies to all the other voice actors who did voices for this game. Now, with that said, Hand Unit is somewhat of a controversial character, especially after Aya's video on the game. Some people like its humor and presence throughout the game, while others are infuriated by its presence and find it to be quite annoying. His role is to basically explain what to expect in the upcoming sections and mislead us in certain instances. Humor is very clearly a subjective topic, so I can't really say if the comedic lines are quirky and good or lame attempts at jokes. However, personally, I don't mind its presence. It's a nice way to introduce certain mechanics while also throwing in some lore to fill in some gaps of the game that would feel empty and hollow otherwise. This character gives us a great transition to the next character, that being Circus Baby. Circus Baby is the new lead of the Core 4, replacing Freddy as the lead, unlike in the other entries. She doesn't appear much in physical form, but rather through auditory form. Heather Masters does a fantastic job voicing this 7'2" animatronic, which honestly carries the quality of this character, as without it, she would lose a lot of her known traits, which would make her yet another forgettable animatronic in the franchise. Her role in the game is to manipulate our point of view character to get what she wants and her Funtime friends want. She oftentimes helps you in instances where Hand Unit's instructions seem like a one-way ticket to heaven. But every now and then, her tone slightly shifts to a more malicious being. However, the change is so subtle that most players won't actually notice it. They'll just keep believing her, which then leads to the horrific fate of our point of view character at the end of the game. The minigame present in Sister Location also shows that Circus Baby ended up killing a blonde young girl who came to her for some ice cream. We will go into its importance later in the story section. But for now, let's move on to the next member of the service, Funtime Freddy. Funtime Freddy, voiced by the one and only Kellen Goff, is a character who is malicious, but unlike the others, he is very upfront about it. The moment we first encountered this 6-foot monstrosity in the Breaker Room challenge, we can tell this entity is a childishly nefarious character who has joy in what he does. Kellen's voice acting is marvelous. The different sounds used for the Funtime Freddy gives off the vibe of a killer robot that acts like a hyperactive child. Honestly, I wouldn't blame you if you said that this character is the most interesting one in the game. He is given 2 minigame sections, both of which, while they are challenging, aren't game-breakingly frustrating, unlike a certain other event we'll get to shortly. This is also the first time where a Freddy character has been important to the games themselves. Sure, Golden Freddy exists, but he is more associated with the Fredbear character rather than Freddy. And up to this point, Freddy hadn't really taken center stage in his own game. But Sister Location completely changes that by making him arguably the most interesting character in the game, at least from an upfront gameplay perspective. Bon Bon, voiced by Becky Shrimpton, is used most as a joke character rather than something that is actually trying to scare you. But the design itself is pretty nice in my opinion. Funtime Foxy is the least fleshed out character out of all the core animatronics in this game. He only has a few sections in the game, but Joe Goddard's voice acting for this character is done pretty nicely. It's interesting, quirky, and not something you'd expect from an animatronic design to lure children. Scott himself admitted that Funtime Foxy legitimately gave him some really scary jump scares at times. I just wish he was a bit more utilized in the game itself. And to round out the core group, we have Ballora, who is the only other character given two gameplay sections in Sister Location. Her persona is more like a parental figure who can see right through our players' intentions, one who can strike fear just by walking across a vent shaft in the dark. Michelle Moss knocks it out of the park with her voice. It is booming with interesting details about grief, about shutting people out of their own lives, being all alone. It in a sense refers to William Afton and his grief over the loss of his wife. Some have speculated that Ballora might even be the rebuilt Mrs. Afton. But let's set that topic of discussion for another day. And to end off the roster, we have Ennard, the amalgamation of all the threats we have faced in the earlier nights, all put into one as a tangle of wires. Ennard had a lot of potential to be a petrifying entity, one that haunts the back alleys of cities at night and steals the bodies of innocent humans. However, this was wasted, as later on the character's purpose ended up shifting to something else. But in Sister Location, the despair he presents during Ennard Night on Night 5 is jaw-droppingly effective. Imagine being stuck in some deep underground bunker with no way out for hours as a horrifying mess of haunted parts comes to haunt you and steal your body just to escape into the outside world. It is very creepy to even think about. The design in general is just terrifying. This tall tangle of wires that kills people just to wear them as a skin suit and eventually collect parts to be an even more terrifying monster of the shadows. Yeah, I am creeped out, thank you very much. Now, with all that said, let's move on to the story. I wouldn't blame you if you told me that Sister Location has the best story out of all the games. It honestly feels like a visual novel at times, while at others, it suddenly shifts to a game that is very difficult to beat. I always saw this as a negative even a few weeks back, but after taking a second look at the game and how these elements are incorporated, I think it actually enhances the despair of Sister Location. The surprising random spikes in difficulty makes it different from the previous 4 entries, which gives it its own unique identity. On Night 1, we are basically given a taste of what's to come. Although there are no threats present here, on initial playthroughs, people don't know that. Thus, the fear is always retained, especially through the quieter approach the ambience takes during certain sections, such as crawling through the vent. Night 2, however, is when things get serious. We start off with a pretty tame challenge, where we hide from Biddy Babs by staying in a small space under a control panel. However, the difficulty from here on out starts to ramp up, with the next challenge being the Ballora Gallery vent crawl through, which then leads to the Breaker Room challenge. Once completed, we retreat out through the same gallery vent, but this time Ballora cannot kill you, which subverts the player's expectations when they find that out later. But on first time playthroughs, they have no idea if she can or can't kill you there. So they go cautiously for no reason. We'll go a lot more into the details of these in the gameplay section. Night 3 introduces us to Funtime Foxy, where we have to go through the gallery vent. This leads to us being tasked with fixing Funtime Freddy in parts and service. Once this is done, the player is then asked to leave through Foxy's vent. However, this time, Foxy will 100% jump scare you. It is a scripted event. Night 4 then starts off with us in a springlock suit, as we then wake up only to see Ballora getting scooped. We then must survive against a horde of mini-arenas while keeping the springlocks of the suit in check. Once this ends, Night 4 is over. Night 5 has two versions of events. One where, after we send baby away on the conveyor belt, we follow her instructions, which then leads us to the scooping room, where Ennard can be seen in the distance, as we are then violently scooped, and our insides get torn out, and replaced by Ennard's body. The other version of events requires us to play a mini-game, where Circus Baby gives out ice cream cones to children. If beaten properly, we then see a cutscene where Circus Baby brutally kills a young girl who wanted ice cream from her. This girl is heavily implied to be the daughter of Mr. Afton, the one we are introduced to in the game's opening. Also, it's interesting to note that the name William Afton as a whole has never actually been stated in the games. The games only refer to him as Mr. Afton. But anyways, it is implied that this girl ends up possessing the animatronic Circus Baby, who was created by Mr. Afton himself. The name of this girl is not known at this point, and it is not revealed until the next installment, Pizzeria Simulator. After beating this minigame, when going back to Night 5, instead of following her instructions, we take a slightly different path, which leads to us going into a private security room, where we fend off Ennard till 6 AM. Ennard here is desperately trying to convince Mike to let him in the room by using the voice of multiple animatronics to try and resonate with him, because they know that if they can't, they will never get another shot at escaping this dark facility. Because at the end of the day, they have the souls of murdered kids in them. Kids who don't want to be locked up in some basement only to be further experimented on. They want revenge against Mr. Afton. However, they don't realize that the person they're up against is not William, but rather his son Michael. At the end of the night, Baby says that she will find a way out of the facility. And she does, as Ennard follows us to our house, and the game then comes to a close. Although the former version of events was the true canonical ending, the fake ending still has lore significance. The custom night update gave us a bunch of 8-bit cutscenes where Michael goes home from work every day, but slowly starts to decay over time. And eventually, Ennard leaves his body and goes into the sewer. But Michael still lives on, as according to Baby, he would still be alive. This is because Baby still thinks that this is actually William and not Michael. We also get a fully rendered 3D cutscene where Michael talks about his experience in the bunker while referring to his father, and then ends the speech by stating that he would be sure to look for him. PJ Haywood does a magnificent job at voicing both Michael and William in this game. Although both characters are voiced by the same person, they have subtle differences to distinguish both of them. William sounds more calculated and cunning, while Michael sounds more exhausted, tired of the life he's been put into for so many years. He even admits that he should be dead now, but somehow he lives on. Somehow his will is still powering him through to do the right thing. It also helps that because both characters are voiced by the same person, they seem to be related to each other. As when it comes to the story, Michael is William's oldest son. Also, the blueprints for the fun times reveal their true intention, that being they're designed to lure and trap children for them to be experimented on, which immediately allowed us to know that Mr. Afton was a killer. And the books released by this point also helped to link Mr. Afton to the purple guy who killed kids back in the pizzerias. And thus, we knew our franchise villain from here on out. Overall, the story is easy to understand. However, its links to the Freddy franchise isn't very strong, with the only references being a name drop and a 1983 Easter egg in the private room. That's really about it, which very much allows for the game to feel disconnected from its previous entries. It was a really jarring shift from haunted spooky pizzerias to an underground bunker with futuristic tech and substances. So, I can understand why some people did not like the sudden shift in the direction of the series. With that said, let's go over the gameplay of Sister Location. This is where Sister Location falters. Although the game is sort of free roam in instances, it is still a very linear game with specific plot threads having to happen after another. As this game is heavily reliant on its story aspect, which I believe Scott leaned into as the lore of the franchise was very important to the fanbase at this point. The gameplay is very different from the previous entries, where rather than building up difficulty by adding new problems over time and thus having the player adjust their gameplay loop to counter that problem, Sister Location instead opts to make each night have a unique type of gameplay, which is a good idea in concept and can definitely work, but the execution was not satisfactory enough for it to work effectively in this game. Night 1 only has you pressing a few buttons. That's really about it. It is a pretty tame start to the game, but I still think this is an okay approach, if the other nights are packed to the brim with gameplay, of course. Night 2 is the most eventful night of the game, where we are tasked with hiding from Biddy Babs initially, which isn't difficult by the way. I honestly have no idea how so many people fail this section on initial playthroughs. Then, we are tasked to go through the Ballora Gallery to reach the Breaker Room. This section has become quite controversial recently, but let's go over it to see what it does well and what it does not do well. The build-up of tension is really good, with nothing but a single flashlight that dimly lights up what lies ahead of you. It is really good at using fear of the unknown against the player, as Ballora gracefully dances to this creepy and sad song while you frantically try to get to the Breaker Room door as fast as possible. And her jump scare is really creepy, as the metal plates in her face opens to reveal a horrifying endoskeleton inside. However, the issue with this section is that when she is supposed to be walking right in front of you, it is a scripted event, not something that can occur multiple times, which can definitely be a tension killer of sorts, especially on retries. After reaching the Breaker Room, we are then given the responsibility of restoring power throughout the facility, as we are stalked in the darkness by none other than Funtime Freddy. The atmospheric tension here can even match that of FNaF 4's, to be honest. The quieter feel of the ambience as this 6-foot tall monstrosity searches for you, while you know that it is not afraid to do something terrifying to you, makes this one of, if not the most tense part of the game. It is handled spectacularly well. I know in my original review I criticized this part of the game as a negative, as the random spike in difficulty just came out of nowhere, but after researching further, I realized this is one of the few things that makes the game such a thrilling experience. Not knowing when the game will throw something easy at you or something extremely difficult at you adds to the tension ever present in this game. The Breaker Room challenge requires us to lift up a monitor to charge the power in the different facilities. However, doing so creates noise, which brings Funtime Freddy closer and closer to you. And when you're not using the monitor, if you didn't charge one of the facilities to 100%, the charge starts to go back down until you open it up again and start charging it up. And to lure Freddy away from you, you must play audio clips of Bon Bon saying that there's no one there in the room with him. So, you'll need to adjust to a gameplay loop just like in the previous 4 installments to beat this part of the game. Once this is done, you will have to crawl back through the Ballora Gallery for the night to end. However, this time, Ballora cannot kill you. But because the player does not know that, they play cautiously and take minutes to beat a section where there are no threats, which in my opinion was a genius move by Scott. Night 3 starts off by having us defend against Biddy Babs again, and then we'll have to go through Foxy's vent. If you thought Ballora's section was creepy, oh, this one is so much worse. Here, you have to walk through pitch black darkness while a light flashes to illuminate the room in short bursts, as Funtime Foxy haunts you in this darkness. As I said, this was one of the few sections that gave Scott some actual scares through the jump scare animation and tension. After this, we are then tasked to do parts and service on Funtime Freddy. Bon Bon goes missing and we have to lure him out until we can click on him to stop him from moving. However, if we wait too long, then Bon Bon jump scare us. This section isn't actually very difficult, and although the tension is still there, I don't think it is nearly as good as the Funtime Foxy's section or even the Breaker Room Challenge section from Night 2. After this, we are supposed to go back through Foxy's vent, but this time, Foxy will guaranteed jump scare you, as it is a scripted event. It catches the player off guard, and even though they played as they were supposed to, they still lost, which would obviously frustrate anyone. But then, they see that hey, Night 4 is starting, so they are still progressing. Night 4 is the most controversial night of Sister Location, thanks to the infamous Spring Lock Challenge, which was very frustrating to many, which is understandable. It is just so difficult for pretty much no reason. Here, we must keep our spring locks intact while mini Renas crawl up the suit to attack us. To stop them, we must shake the suit, but this causes the spring locks to become loose, and thus the cycle continues. The concept is really well thought out. It's just that many players found it so insanely tough to beat. That makes this night the most controversial one in the game by far. Once this challenge ends, Night 4 comes to a close. The true version of the events of Night 5 consists of us having to send Circus Baby off on the conveyor belt and then going into the scooping room ourselves, where we then get our insides ripped out of us as a cunning Ennard watches from behind the glass. The lack of gameplay here is something I did not like because Night 1 also lacked gameplay, but the cutscene here is done quite well in my opinion. However, to get the other ending, we have to beat a minigame where Circus Baby gives out ice cream to children. It's difficult to beat within the given time, but with a specific strategy, it is possible, which then allows us to access the other ending by rejecting to listen to Baby's orders and going into a different direction, where we are then met with the private room of the facility, equipped with doors, vents, and cameras. That's right, you are put in a room where you have to play like you did back with the old FNaF games, which to me was a genius move on Scott's part. We were back to basics, the way people were familiar with. Your power management here is very important, as the game gives you just enough power to survive the night, so it's going to be very close when it comes to your victory or your loss. The cameras drain a lot of power, which forces you to use them as little as possible. However, one issue I have with this mode is Ennard's jump scare. Scott could have taken so many creative liberties with this jump scare, such as Ennard being able to control the wires to attack you, but instead Ennard just comes towards you at the screen, and that's it. The only redeeming thing about it is the fact that the jump scare sound effect is good, and that it pretty much is the only reason why it is even remotely scary at all. Besides that, it's good. It allows this entry to still somewhat feel like your traditional FNaF game that is linked to the rest of the franchise, which it was sorely lacking in the previous sections. At least even Security Breach has several references to the previous games put around the Pizzaplex, but here we don't actually get much besides a 1983 Easter egg in the private room and a few name drops. Custom Night basically gives us 10 animatronics to go up against, and it is pretty difficult, but the challenge aspect is what makes it interesting. Scott just ended up giving us more of what we wanted. Overall, Sister Location is a game that is fundamentally different from its predecessors, which isn't inherently a bad thing, unlike what some people like to say. A franchise needs to evolve and develop over time. It can't remain stagnant, and Scott knew this well. Even in the private room and custom night sections, he still implements newer mechanics to keep it interesting, and not just a rehash of FNaF 1 and FNaF 2's mechanics. The implementation of the mechanic where the animatronics can lower your power and oxygen keeps this game mode interesting, especially where they can lower your oxygen, as it is kind of similar to the scrapped mechanic from FNaF 2 with the toxic meter. Not in terms of the same implementation, but pretty much the same idea of sorts. This game is not perfect by any means, as stated by the video made by yeah. But in my opinion, his video is a little biased towards the pure gameplay aspects. I mean, to be fair, he doesn't even talk about the story himself. The YouTuber Pastor does in the video. And again, this is not me hating on him. He's a good YouTuber, and I'm sure that he is a nice person in real life. I'm just stating a few constructive criticisms of mine. But please keep in mind that these are my opinions and you do not have to agree with them. But, in my opinion, Sister Location is a mixed bag with some amazing features and some red herrings put into one package. With that said, I'm signing off. See ya!